MMA Now, powered by Film On TV Network.
I'm David Kano with MMA Now, and right now we're on location in Las Vegas, Nevada for Sergey Kovalev versus Andre Ward, pound for pound, who is the best. And before we get into this, this will be for the pound for pound title right now. Chocolatito they have him number one, and Triple G and Canelo are somewhere in there, but make no mistake about it, I think this will define who is number one. But again, let's talk about what happened this past week, a week ago, and even this weekend, a week ago. We have a new president, and I don't want to get hung up on this, but I did some tweets about this. I don't think this is a big deal. I had no dog in the fight per se. There was no one that I was particular for. Someone that I would have written in is dead. Ulysses S. Grant, so that wasn't going to happen. I just think that what's going on right now with the protests that are turning violent and causing damage to the city is counterproductive for what this country is all about. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But UFC 205 was also over the weekend. Big event, New York City, first time ever, where there was 3 title fights. The pay-per-view numbers aren't quite in as of yet, and the UFC doesn't disclose exact pay-per-view numbers, but it does look like that this should be number one all time. Let's talk about the card a little bit. Khabib versus Michael Johnson in the lightweight division. This was a fight that really could have went either way. Michael Johnson stayed a little bit busier than Khabib, and Khabib kind of just mauled Michael Johnson in the end in the second round, being able to make Johnson's tap to a Kimura, and which propels him and Tony Ferguson to the number one contender. I think that would be a great fight to make. Ferguson coming off a decisive victory over Rafael dos Anjos, make this fight, and then obviously we have to see what happens with Conor next year. Also on the card, that we had Raquel Pennington versus Miesha Tate, and Miesha Tate retired after the fight. Pennington put it on her, won a decision, and really looked pretty good against her former coach on The Ultimate Fighter. Miesha Tate, what will her legacy look like? What will she go down in history? Well, she fought Ronda Rousey 2 times, losing both times, but she was a Strikeforce champion, and she was a pioneer for women's MMA, one of those ones along with Ronda Rousey and Gina Carano and even Cyborg. Frankie Edgar and Jeremy Stevens fought at a featherweight match that looks like that also may have title implications in addition to Anthony Pettis and Max Holloway. Frankie Edgar was able to win a decision over Jeremy Stevens after he fought Jose Aldo and didn't really look too good against the former featherweight champion. Yoel Romero and Chris Weidman, the battle of 185 to who gets the next shot at Michael Bisping. Weidman coming off a neck fusion surgery, and Yoel Romero over not so good victory over Jacare was going to decide who took on the count, and Weidman looked good early on. He looked good in the first round, which I thought he won the first round. Second round, he was starting to get taken down, and then finally finished with the TKO flying knee, finished it on the ground. And where does this put Chris Weidman? It puts him having to work his way back up. Weidman, I don't know if he came out back a little bit too early. A neck injury isn't something to play around with. And also the New York Athletic Commission, State Athletic Commission, is suspending Weidman for 60 days, and he will not be allowed to compete in New York until 2017, if he even competes in New York in the near future. First title fight was Joanna Jędrzejczyk against Karolina Kovalev, and it's a fight that I felt that would go the full distance, the full 5 rounds, and it did go 5 rounds. I thought Joanna was going to just be able to have her way with Karolina, but Karolina showed her some grit, some will, and even some power in the 4th round, catching Joanna, stunning Joanna, rocking Joanna, and where it actually got a little bit hairy. I thought she had a chance to finish Joanna. The ref was looking in intently to see if she was able to intelligently keep on defending herself and keep on going. Joanna eventually recovered and was able to take the 5th round, but it was a very entertaining fight. I still think Claudia Gadelha is still the clear number 1 contender, still next to Joanna. a fight between Claudia and Carolina would be interesting to see what happens there in that 115 division. Ioano has said that she wants to be a champion at 125 as well. That is a division which is not official yet. There have been some unofficial fights at that weight class. So we'll see what happens there. In the co-main event, we saw Stephen Wonderboy Thompson against Tyron Woodley for the welterweight championship belt. And people were mixed on this. On Twitter, we put out a poll. Wonderboy had the edge from the fans, but Woodley had his own contingent of fans as well that thought he might take it. One of the best fights of the year, and the fourth round was maybe one of the best fights in MMA history, which I put out there. The first round, Woodley was able to able to take Wonderboy down at the end of the round. He took the first round. Second round, Wonderboy came back from that. Third round, Wonderboy also took it from a point standpoint. Fourth round, Wonderboy was rocked with a right by Tyron Woodley. Was all over the cage. Woodley went in for the kill, throwing uppercuts, and Wonderboy has a chin of granite. I thought it was going to be called off. Eventually took him to the ground to try to put him into a guillotine, which was a very tight guillotine again. I mean, that's a guillotine that people don't usually get out of. People are saying that Wonderboy has a smaller neck and a smaller head, so he was able to weather the storm and pull out from there. But nonetheless, an entertainment fight that went 47-47 on two judges' scorecards with a majority draw. That fight is what Dana White said it will be next, and it's interesting to see if that's the fight next, or will McGregor step up once again to look at another title fight, which brings us to McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez. McGregor has obviously done things in the sport that no one else has done. Now he's the first two-weight division champion simultaneously. He's supposed to give up a belt. We don't know what's going to happen with McGregor. His big announcement was that he's having a baby and that he wants a new deal with the UFC. He wants some equity. He wants something substantial to up his payday. I tweeted out that I think he's looking for a $40 million payday per fight in the future, where he's probably making upwards to around $15 million right now with pay-per-views and purse and even sponsorships. So we'll see what happens with that. He'd certainly be the first one to deserve that for what he's done for the company, especially in the time of transition after being sold for $4 billion. That fight, a lot of people have talked about how it went. Alvarez has come out and said he didn't fight the right fight. That wasn't even the game plan for his 10-week training camp. He was supposed to circle to his left and use his wrestling instead of getting into a boxing match with Conor. So, Conor, it's interesting what's going to happen with McGregor. He has a bunch of fights that he could go with. There's Khabib online. There's Ferguson. There's Woodley at welterweight, where he had some words with Tyron Woodley. There's also a potential trilogy fight. There's so many different things that can go on. It'll be a soap opera, and that's one of the reasons why I think McGregor is a headline and a name. People want to know what he's going to do next, what's going to happen, because he's so unpredictable. But this week we have Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev, and right now joining us is a special boxing correspondent. He has the #1 channel on YouTube, and he joins us at a perfect time. We have Marcos Villegas.
Walking in right Walking in.
You perfect timing.
Like the NWO, like that.
Perfect time, Marcos. How you doing?
What's up, man? How's it going, kiddo? Good to see you, bro.
We just wrapped up the UFC 205. Did you have any thoughts on that? Anything lasting that you left with after watching the card?
I told everybody in the build-up to that fight that Alvarez was a nightmare matchup. Let me reverse that. Conor was a nightmare matchup for Alvarez coming into that fight. And I based it because I've seen a lot of Eddie Alvarez when he was in Bellator and the fights that he had with Chandler, the trilogy fights that he had, and then even in the other fights that he's had in the UFC. The dude gets hit and he gets hurt a lot. And I knew Conor's very, very accurate, and you get a guy with his timing and his high acumen in boxing, it was just a nightmare. Well, I looked at it as like, whoa, that's the easiest path to a title that Conor has at that division.
Even with Eddie's wrestling.
Because when push comes to shove, when Eddie gets hit and he gets dropped like that, his natural instinct comes out and he wants to scrap. You've seen it on these fights. When Chandler would knock him down, he would get back up and want to fight like he sees red. And that's what he did in that fight. When he got tagged, he lost his game plan. He lost his composure. He stopped with the leg kicks. And he was just standing there, and it turned into a boxing fight. And he got picked apart. He got picked apart. So it didn't surprise me at all. A lot of people were saying, Eddie's going to out-wrestle this guy. He's going to grind him. He's going to take him down. It's going to be no contest. It's going to be an easy fight. And the one thing that I would tell people is like, no, Eddie's going to get hurt. He always gets hurt. He's going to get clipped, but this time he's going to get clipped with the guy that's very, very accurate, and it's going to be the end of it. So when it happened, I wasn't surprised. But I think it was the easiest path for him to win a title. If it would have been RDA, it would have been a lot tougher fight.
So you had Conor winning easily in that
I told
fight.
everybody. My Conor's going to knock him out.
What do you think is next? He was talking to Woodley and sized him up a bit backstage.
That's crazy talk, man. There's no way. You got a guy that weighs, I have to say he weighs like 200 pounds when he's not cutting. And you have him cutting to 170, and then you have Conor wanting to go up and fight a guy that's going to outweigh him by 35 pounds.
But don't Styles,
there's no way.
But don't Styles make...
They do, but to a certain point. They do when it's a 5-pound difference. They do when it's a 10-pound difference. That's when a 30-pound difference. No, it doesn't.
Do you think Woodley would be able to touch Conor with his right?
Woodley would knock him out. Woodley would knock him out. Conor would be tagging him, but I think Woodley would be like the Terminator, and he's just walking through these shots, and he's going to clip him with something. If not clip him, he's going to take him down because Woodley has such strong wrestling in his arsenal. And I think we've seen that's kind of the blueprint that's coming out to beat Conor, is to get him in the ground, because we know he's not good on the ground. On the feet, he's a savant. He's legit. But on the ground, it's where he has a lot of trouble. And that's one of Woodley's strong points, is his wrestling and be able to take someone on the ground. But I don't like that matchup because of that 30-pound weight difference that we would see during the fight. And I think Woodley would just walk through all these punches. You got a guy that you outweigh by 30 pounds. That makes a big difference in fights. And here's the other thing. He is a little guy. Conor is. So you would think his cardio would be very, very good. With Nate in both fights, he struggled. The smaller guy was gassing out against the bigger guy because weight had a factor, of course. When you get punched, it makes you fatigued as well.
But
so those are two things.
Is that a fair assessment? Because Woodley isn't known for having the best cardio. He even said himself he gassed out in that fourth round after he couldn't get the guillotine.
It is, but then again, these little guys, you see little guys in all combat sports, they have the best gas tanks. They don't gas out. They're just punching machines. That's what they're known for. And you see a guy who's supposed to be a little guy, 145, 155, he goes to 170 and he starts tiring out and at the end of the second round. So it makes you wonder, hey, wait a second, that doesn't seem right. You're a guy coming from the lower weight classes, moving up. Your cardio should be more on point with someone that's able to go 5 rounds at a crazy pace. And it wasn't that. And I think it was a combination. The first fight, he got hurt, and that sucks the wind out of you. In the second fight, you have a bigger guy that's imposing his will on you, throwing those shots, and you're used to getting shots from a guy who's 55 pounds, 60 pounds, and now you're getting a guy at 170 throwing those punches. It sucks the life out of you. It drains you.
That's actually an interesting assessment. I would say
it's like if you were to fight a guy that outweighed you 30 pounds, and you're fighting him, and it's going 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, his size is going to play a huge factor in that.
Well, we could talk about the heavyweight division where we see guys that have a 30-pound difference there, and it doesn't seem to make that big of a deal.
But those are heavyweights, though,
Like
man.
if someone's 230 and someone's 260, you see these fights all the time.
But those guys gas because they're heavyweights. The only heavyweight that I've seen that doesn't gas consistently has been Kane. He's the only heavyweight that I could think of off the top of my head that doesn't gas. Even Fedor, older Fedor would gas.
Stipe went 5 rounds.
But not
a few times.
not at the pace that Kane does. No one has that pace.
Not at the high level.
Yeah.
Well, so let me ask you your thoughts on how did you score the Wonder Boy and Woodley fight in the end? Did you have it a draw?
No, I had Woodley winning.
You did.
I thought Woodley won that fight.
How did you score it?
I think I had it 3-2.
So you had
But
it
here's the
3-2
thing,
for
though.
Woodley then.
Yeah, 3-2. But that one round
It
could
was
have
a
been a 10-8.
10-8. I had that around
And
10-8.
a lot of judges didn't score. Only one judge had a 10-8, I think.
I think.
Yeah. So like that kind of blows my mind. I think there's still not a uniform thing on what constitutes a 10-8 round with these judges. I think that, it's different. In boxing, a 10-8, you score a knockdown, it's a 10-8 round. In MMA, there's no knockdown, so it's a little bit different. I see it as you're on the brink of getting knocked out or submitted. It should be a 10-8. It should be something where it's you leave that round and you think, dude, that fight, it could have been stopped in that round. Like, you got your ass kicked that round. That's a 10-8 to me. But who knows what they're telling these judges on the criteria of what constitutes a 10-8. But he should have gotten a 10-8 on all the judges for that round, and I think he should have won the fight.
Well, you're in addition to MMA, you're known for boxing.
Yeah, I dabble a little bit in MMA, not so much anymore.
one of the number one boxing channels online. We're here, Andre Ward, Sergey Kovalev. I don't think this fight is getting the coverage that I think it should. Is that a fair assessment from you being here?
I think it has a lot to do with this is both fighters' first foray into pay-per-view. Kovalev has a name. Andre has a name because he's the last Olympian from the U.S. to win a gold medal. But they haven't been on this stage before. It's their first time. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Well, what about Kovalev and Bernard Hopkins?
Well, that was in a pay-per-view.
But wouldn't you say that's a big stage?
But there's levels. There's HBO main event, and then there's a pay-per-view. A pay-per-view is a different beast. It's a lot more. You got to have a really big name to garner a lot of buys because.
But both guys are in the top 10 pound for pound. Why do you think they're not household pay-per-view names?
Well, it's just they're not there yet. You have a guy in Kovalev that English is limited. He's learning his English, but a lot of people don't know him yet. And here's the other thing too: it's very hard to go into the mainstream. You got to do something extraordinary. You're seeing with Manny, the reason why he went into the mainstream is he had a really crazy story. He went from selling donuts on the street to knocking people out that were 20 pounds heavier than him, and then doing it in 8 weight classes. And then he had a whole nation behind him. And then he gets these spectacular knockouts where he's just murking fools. So that's the mainstream. With Floyd, it was the undefeated record. He could talk the talk. He backs it up. And then the money character is what really put him over to the mainstream. What we're seeing with Canelo and Gennady, they're tipping. They're getting closer and closer to falling into that. Conor, he talks, but he gets spectacular results, and it pushes him. And the UFC marketing machine is a lot more well-rounded, complete. They know how to push and market their fighters a lot better than the boxing industry as a whole. So all those are factors that fall into it. Andre, I would think, would be one that could, given that he's a good-looking guy. He's probably the best fighter, American-wise, that we have in this country right now. He won the gold medal. So to me, it should, but then it has a lot to do with he doesn't get a lot of knockouts. And in combat sports, getting a knockout is king.
Floyd Mayweather, though.
Yeah,
but you can point to Floyd.
No, but here's the thing: people don't know. Floyd was a badass up until a certain point in his career when his hands were getting hurt. When you see Floyd at the Corrales fight, the Chop Chop fight, all these other fights, Floyd would put it on fools. He was exciting to watch. And then he started having hand problems, and that's when he switched up the style and became defensive. But when you look at Floyd, his, I want to say, first 18, 19 fights, he was an exciting fighter. Really, really exciting, and that's what a lot of people forget about Floyd. But you bundle that in with the undefeated streak, and then the creation of the money character, and then the platform with 24/7. At that point, they had never done it before. So that really pushed them. And then when they fought, that was the biggest pay-per-view of all time. So those were already good little pushes that pushed him into. I would say he didn't really cross over until he did the Dancing with the Stars thing, when he became more of a household name, and then he went and did the WWE thing as well. Those things, of course, helped. But it's a combination of a lot of little things. It just doesn't happen in your first pay-per-view or happen in a few HBO fights. This is a long, drawn-out process.
Well, these guys are 33 and 32. They're
Yeah.
not spring chickens. They've been around. They're 30 and 0. What do you anticipate this pay-per-view doing? You think it beats the Canelo Liam Smith, which I don't even think that should be him fighting Smith should have been a pay-per-view, or even the Pacquiao versus Vargas. How do you anticipate this pay-per-view going?
I hope it does well, to be honest. I really do hope it does well because these guys deserve it. They're two of the best that boxing has to offer, and it's a fight that we don't get to see a lot in this sport. In MMA, we get to see it all the time, but not in boxing, So I really do hope it does well, and I really do hope that it gets a good pay-per-view buy because I think that out of all the fights that were made this year, this is probably, on this stage, the best and most competitive, and the one that a lot of people are seeing it a pick'em, or a lot of people are seeing it as 50-50, or if not, skewed just a little tiny bit to one person or the other. So I'm hoping that it does well. Now, is it going to do well? Is it going to be like a Canelo pay-per-view or a Pacquiao pay-per-view? I don't know. Canelo has a bigger name. He's been on pay-per-view a lot longer. Manny's been on pay-per-view the last 8-9 years. So there's already built-in fan bases there. So we'll see. I really do hope, though, that it's successful because if there's two guys that should be getting the attention, it's these two, given what they've done in the ring, given that they're two of the best right now in the division, and they're putting it all on the line there.
Now, this fight is billed pound for pound. Do you agree that whoever wins this fight should be pound for pound number one in the world?
Definitely, I think so. I've had Andre Ward as the second best fighter in the world for a long time, even when he was inactive. I kept telling people he's the second best fighter compared to Floyd. But with Floyd gone, I even still say it. You can make a very strong argument that Andre Ward is the best fighter in the world right now. Now, with this fight, seeing that Sergey's also on the top 5, I think you can say with confidence the winner should be considered pound for pound. Now, you're going to have people say, well, what about Lomachenko? What about Rigondeaux? What about Golovkin? And
Or Chocolatito.
Or Roman, which, Roman, I don't think the pound for pound best fighter in the world should be going life and death with somebody like he did against Carlos Cuadras. To me, if you go life and death like that, you're not pound for pound best fighter. It was a close fight. And
even had the other.
Yeah, he took a lot of punches in that fight, too. It wasn't vintage Chocolatito, but because of that fight, it made my belief that Andre should be put higher than Roman. Now, with that said, I think the way it's being marketed and the way that people generally agree that Andre is either number 1 or number 2, and Sergey is either 4 or 5, that you could say without a doubt the winner gets that mythical standing of being the best pound for pound.
Now, let's break down the actual fight. I know you broke it down many different ways with many different personalities and people, but how I see it is Kovalev has the power. He has a knockout power. Andre Ward has that mental capability to keep on going, to fight through, to make adjustments, kind of like a Floyd, where he's able to change his game plan as it goes by. How do you break down this fight, and who do you see winning?
I want to give a slight advantage, if I had to pick, to win this fight to Andre Ward via, I want to say, a unanimous decision. I could see a unanimous decision, but I could also see a split decision. How I see it, I think it's really the first 5 rounds are going to be crucial, and I think it could end up being a very slow-paced, very methodical fight, a fight in which we see Andre picking his spots and kind of lulling Sergey into his rhythm so that he has a low punch, a volume output, so that all the shots that are scored are the clear shots on Andre Ward's part. I can see that because when Andre's fought other fighters that have big punches, that's what he's done. Saying that, though, Andre's never fought a guy who could punch the way that Sergey can punch. This guy's a murderous puncher. And just we saw with the Hopkins fight, one punch can change everything. And it's very possible that Sergey can land because Sergey is extremely underrated when it comes to his boxing ability. The guy's legit. And he proved that against Bernard Hopkins. And if you really watch Sergey, he has really, really solid boxing fundamentals. He comes from the Russian school. Those guys don't mess around. Those guys know their boxing. But I do expect at some point to Andre to really, really show his ability to adapt And the one thing with Andre Ward that I've always been most impressed with, he has this crazy way of taking what you do, the best thing that you can do, and he takes it away, or he does it better than you. And I've seen him do it time and time and time again, and I think that he's going to be able to do it because he has more dimensions in the arsenal than Kovalev does. We know Kovalev is going to come in and he's going to try to punch and take this guy out. And Ward can adapt, and he's shown his ability to adapt, and I really think that is going to put him over in this fight.
Do you think someone's going to get hurt at all in this fight? And does
It could, man. Kovalev's such a big puncher. I would not be surprised.
Does Kovalev need to make this a dirty fight? Does he need to push the action in order to win the fight?
I don't know about dirty, but he needs to push the action.
Dirty meaning, in the trenches, in his face, against the ropes.
I think Sergey would want to keep him at the end of his punches. Sergey has, I believe, a 2.5-inch reach advantage, so I think he's going to want to keep him at his distance where he could really use his full power in his shots. I don't think he wants to fight Andre like this because I think that's more advantage to Andre because
really?
You can't throw with full power in here in this space, but if you're here you can, and I think Andre's gonna maybe want him a little bit close to be able to maul him and hold him and work on the inside.
So you're predicting the fight to go Andre Ward decision or split decision?
I think he's gonna get a decision or a split decision. It's gonna be good, but I think it might be a slower paced fight given that he's done that with opponents that have been perceived as huge punchers before in the past. Abraham, Carl Froch, that's what he did with them. Even though with Carl Froch, he was able to beat him with one hand. He injured his hand, I think, on his forehead or something like that. But he did that in the past. So I think that he already has that logged in his head, and Andre's really going to start getting data first, second, third round, and then we'll see him start adjusting, and then we'll see what happens. But I think that he's going to win.
Now, boxing, as far as the undercard goes, a lot of people, these are not household names like a Kovalev or War, or even like MMA where they'll stack a card like 205.
But now it's becoming rare with MMA. They used to stack it all the time, and now they're not stacking it as much.
But do you think that's boxing's mistake of not building these?
But you know what? It's also a thing of economics too. Andre Ward's base pay is $5 million. It's a lot, and then you factor in the cost of putting together the pay-per-view, the percentage they have to give away for distributing the pay-per-view to HBO. So it comes down to economics a lot of the times, and they can't afford to pay these other guys to come on the card because they're paying the main eventers so much money. So that's why sometimes the undercards suffer. We've seen it before with Canelo fought Mayweather. We had Garcia and Matisse. And the big complaint during that time that Richard Schaefer said was, man, we're spending a lot of money on this card, but hey, we're doing it. But I had to pay Matisse a lot of money. I had to pay Danny a lot of money for this fight. And I think the reason why the UFC is able to do it is because they don't pay their fighters as much. Now with 205, yeah, they had to shell out the money, but this is a big, huge event. This is the first time they did that. But with the addition of so many cards happening and the addition to that, they don't pay their fighters as much. They can afford to put these fighters that we perceive as big names on their cards, and they don't take a huge hit in terms of their overhead.
Well, with the Conor, just rounding out the MMA thing, is he wants equity right now.
That's not going to happen. There's no way.
I predict that he'll get.
I don't think so.
He's wanting $40 million around there.
He'll get the money. They'll pay him more, but to equity, no, because.
But do you think he'll give $40 million a fight? Because I broke down
you could, because if he asked for a bigger split pay-per-view wise, it could end up adding it if there's a lot of pay-per-view buys. I have no clue what he made for this fight. I heard that his base was $3 million, something like that. And then if you factor in whatever percentage,
maybe 10 to 15,
it could be that,
right.
The total payout and stuff like that. But in terms of equity, I don't see that happening, because then that gives all these other fighters precedent to ask for a percentage. And now they're in a position where they have to give all these percentages to everybody, because everybody's going to speak up and say, hey, I made you money too. I want a cut of the company.
But from a money standpoint, I'm saying 40 is what I'm predicting that he's going to make. Because I just broke down, if the gate makes $17 million and they did $2 million.
Yeah, but you got to understand too, the big part of that gate goes to the UFC. It doesn't go to Conor.
Right, but in addition to that, you have the pay-per-views, which they could have made $100 million.
Yeah, they could have. But still, their side is a lot different. we don't know. This is all conjecture, how the percentage breakdowns. But what we do know from history is the UFC gets the biggest cut of the pot, and then everything else is to the fighters. So I could see him becoming the biggest paid in that sport.
Lorenzo Fertitta said he believes Conor's going to be the first $100 million man.
He could. Now, does he mean per fight or does he mean earnings in total? We don't know. If it's earnings in total, I think so. But if he's going to make $100 million in one night, that has to be a huge fight. That's Mayweather type money. And Mayweather only got to that payday because of Manny, and it did 4.6 million buys.
He did $300 million, I think, in that fight.
He made a ridiculous amount of money.
Last question. We caught up with Ray Boom Boom Mancini a few weeks back, and he's not one to mince words about what would happen. I think he even went on your show and broke down the whole Mayweather versus the
Leonard McGregor
Hearns
stuff.
But the thing that was interesting was Canelo. He brought up Canelo and Triple G, and he says that Canelo has the power to make the fight against Triple G, no matter. And I brought up the Golden Boy. It's Golden Boy kind of shielding him from it. He's like, no, as a fighter, you could demand that fight. What are you hearing? Do you agree with that assessment?
I do, because say you own a business, all right, or say you call the shots. You call the shots. You could override your team and say, no, I want this to happen right now. With the Mayweather fight with Canelo, they were telling him, don't take the fight. I believe Oscar told him, don't take the fight. It's too early for you. Richard was like, no, take the fight. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take the fight. At the end of the day, it is the fighter that decides if they want to take a fight or not. Now, if they have a team with them, the team, of course, has their best interest in him and in themselves, too. They see this as a situation where maybe they think, hey, if we let it go a little bit longer, you could get 2 more fights. You make your quick 30 mil. That's 60 mil in the bank for you. Or I don't know, I'm just throwing out a number there. Why not make the most amount of money when we get to that fight? And then when that fight happens, you'll make a lot of money. You'll make a lot more, and if you had made now plus 2 paydays. So I think they're taking a look at that aspect. We're going to fight him, but why not get a few paydays in there before we fight him? Because there's a chance that you could lose that fight. And when you lose that fight, you could potentially take a cut in your earnings, even though he has it. And that's the thing that kind of ruffles my feathers. He lost to Mayweather, and he's still making these huge paydays. Even if he loses to Golovkin, granted, he doesn't get knocked out really bad, which I don't think he will, he's still going to make a lot of money. So he has the power to go, you know what, I want this fight. Let's go ahead and do it. So he does. I do agree with that opinion. At the end of the day, if you're calling the shots, you're the boss, you have the power to make something happen.
You're the first boxing reporter that I've heard that has said that. That right there is Marcos Villegas, FightHub TV. Thanks so much for coming on.
Man. I appreciate it.
And much more fight coverage this week. And again, the fight Saturday, T-Mobile Arena, Sergey Kovalev versus Andre Ward to see who's pound for pound number 1.